There we go. Okay. So I'll kick us off real quick and then I'll pass it over to you, Jenna. Welcome everybody to the March Lunch and Learn for the WiscWeb service. Obviously, we are doing this a bit differently this month with using Zoom instead of my usual YouTube stream. That's because we wanted to offer a little bit more interaction with all of you in relation to some of the things that we're going to talk about today. Allow you guys to ask some questions and pop onto the chat if you so desire. But I'm going to turn it over to Jenna Klinner, who is our service lead, and she's going to kind of go through the events management conversation with a slide deck, some information. I'll be monitoring the chat, so if you guys have questions as we go through this, please feel free to throw those questions into the chat. Or at the end, once Jen is done, we can have some back and forth then as well. So I yield the floor.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. I am going to kind of chat through the big topic that we have for you today, which is events management. And then Matt will kind of follow up with a couple other topics as well. So I will get started. I have a presentation today. It is very text heavy. I apologize in advance. The reason I did that was just in case any of you wanted to share the slides or look at them later, then you have all the information there. So again, apologies in advance. Okay, so we have a pretty full agenda for this topic. Here are a couple things that I wanted to cover today. One is a review of some recent events calendar updates. Events calendar is the plugin that we use for events in WiscWeb. Data from our events calendar usage audit, an overview of some things that we've been working on, a review of some barriers that our team is experiencing in relation to events calendar, an opportunity to gather your input, and a discussion of next steps. So to get started, I wanted to provide some background on Events Calendar 6.0, which is an update that our team tested in Dev and QA back in late 2022. This release included a major update which involves migrating your site to their new event data storage system. When we upgraded to this version in our test environments, the change immediately tried to update all of our databases at once. We didn't know it at the time, but it eventually resulted in our environment fully crashing. And this was happening in the background before we actually migrated any test sites. So again, this was just in a staging environment. It didn't affect our production sites, but that's what happened when we tried to upgrade. We tried using their new process to migrate a site to the new event data storage system. Sorry, that's a mouthful. And that change failed with no information other than a failure error. We couldn't find any information from the vendor on what happened or why. And we ended up having to fully revert our test environments back to the previous version in order to restore them to full capacity. We reached out to the vendor to see if they could provide us with more information about the update and what might be happening, but they didn't respond back for quite a while. A note on their support form indicated that they were experiencing an influx in support cases related to the 6.0 release. And then questions sent to the vendor over the last few months have largely gone unanswered. They have responded that they got the message, but they're not actually answering our questions. The vendor has since rolled out a couple new updates to fix some of the bugs with 6.0, but none have been very promising. We've currently tested up to 6.0.9 and are still experiencing significant issues. And at this point, we believe they had not tested the updates on a multi-site of our size, and they seem a little bit unwilling to prioritize our needs moving forward. So to kind of recap where things are at, if we were to upgrade our sites to this version of the plugin, it could break our entire production environment, as well as introduce other worrisome issues. And the plugin vendor for Events Calendar has been unhelpful in troubleshooting our concerns. In addition to issues related to Events Calendar 6.0, that particular version, we're also seeing a couple ongoing issues with this plugin and vendor. So I'll just kind of buzz through these. We regularly are seeing errors in our server logs, not just one or two, but many. There's some conflicts related to weak view, especially with version 5.16.4. There's design conflicts with the campus brand. So many of you will probably remember how difficult it has been to make things like buttons look styled correctly in events calendar events. There's PHP and compatibility issues. So at this point, the vendor has not made events calendar compatible with PHP 8.1 or 8.2, which limits our ability to upgrade. The Pro version of the plugin requires us to maintain two separate plugins, Events Calendar and Events Calendar Pro. And these have different version numbers associated with them that we have to keep track of, which adds an extra barrier. We also pay for this plugin. It is one of our most expensive plugins. So it's a bit worrisome to be having these kind of issues when we're paying for it and we're not getting support on that. So at this point in time, our team is being forced to make some very hard decisions on what to do next. And for full transparency, we are investing time in testing alternative options. And this is not a simple feat. We could abandon events calendar, but we aren't 100% confident on a suitable alternative. We are interested in gaining a better understanding of what groups really need in terms of events management, and we're also assessing our ability to support the broad events management needs of the university. So in this discovery, we're running into several barriers that should be understood when assessing possible outcomes. First, we can't upgrade to the latest version of Events Calendar, but leaving the plugin in a non-updated state, so just staying on the version that we're at, puts us at a security risk. So if it's not being patched, it isn't receiving any of the latest security updates that the vendor might have released. So we don't want that to go on for too long. We've tested a good handful of the most popular events management plugins on the market, and none have provided exactly what Events Calendar offers, and most introduce other barriers or risks as well. We also assess the events management tools that are currently available on campus. Primarily, those are today.wisc.edu and Google Calendar. And again, neither fully replicate what you can do in Events Calendar. We also looked at a tool that is being considered for campus. It has vast abilities, but is really intended for groups doing high level events management with like ticketing and registration, who need to be able to track data on enrollment for events. It's not ideal for the type of everyday events that most of our users need, but could be cool in the future. Our service has a few competing priorities at the moment, which make troubleshooting this issue even more challenging. This includes things like things that were recently completed, but still took a lot of time and energy, like the embed code and font changes, and some upcoming and ongoing tasks like the just anything related to the UW theme development, anything related to feature requests, Google Analytics 4 release, security header changes, infrastructure troubleshooting related to bot attacks and cookie tracking. And we're also a small team, so to users of this service, it might look like we do a really simple thing, just hosting and supporting sites, but you can kind of think of it like an iceberg. So there's like only a bit visible, but there's a whole lot underneath happening below the water. So kind of to state it plainly, we're balancing a lot with few resources. And we have, if you kind of like look at our team makeup, it's myself and two developers who are 100% WiscWeb. And then we have an infrastructure person and Matt for about 50% of the time. So we did an audit in order to better understand current usage of Events Calendar and wanted to share those results with you today. So we have about 1,800 sites currently in WiscWeb, and about 300 of those had the plugin activated. Of those with the plugin active, over half were not actively using it. And by this, I mean there were no events added or they hadn't entered any new events in over 6 months. Of the 50% actually using it, about 68% had very simple use needs. So this involved very basic things like adding a title, a short description, date, and time. So your normal like little events. About 10% of users had what we considered medium level needs. This was groups that might be doing a little bit more than just basic text, or could be groups that have fairly simple events, but just create a lot of them. And finally, we had about 5% that had what we considered to be complex needs. So this was the groups who have very detailed events pages using things like buttons, tons of imagery, maps, social icons, etc. So based on this, what we considered quantitative data, here's what we were able to surmise. Most groups have very simple events needs like date, location, simple description, and maybe a map. A handful of groups need a little bit more. So this would be things like full page of details about an event search, event categories, etc. And based on our feature requests, we also have identified two more needs that weren't articulated in the usage data. Those are that groups wish to have the ability to share events between sites. And also there is a need for some sort of registration option. However, this is just the quantitative data that's just based on a usage audit. So the purpose of this conversation today is to capture some more of that qualitative data from all of you that goes a little bit deeper into your needs. So before we open up the discussion, I wanted to touch a little bit on WiscWeb's vision for the future so that you are all aware. A few things that we'd be looking for here are something supportable with our small team, something that doesn't introduce any new infrastructure or server issues, and something that meets the needs of most. It will always be a challenge for us to find a tool that satisfies the needs of all. We're shooting for something that meets the needs of most. So what we're looking for from all of you today is, what is your vision for your site in terms of events management? What are your primary events management needs? What are your concerns for the future? And we also have a Qualtrics survey that you can fill out if you wish for your feedback to be anonymous. And Matt can throw that link in the chat. Let me know if you need that, Matt. But yeah, the purpose of this conversation right now is to find out a little bit more about what you need. So I'm going to stop sharing for a sec so that I can see you all. So anyone that would like to share, their events management needs, any concerns they have, feel free to unmute. If you'd like to turn on your camera, you can, but you are not required.
Yeah.
I can start off actually.
Yeah.
I just started a process. Hi. I just started a process of using Events Manager, and I want to just explain like why we landed on Events Manager. That might be helpful because we did go back and forth between Google Calendar. We're probably fall into the simple version. We use this on our assessments team to just show upcoming surveys so that campus partners can know when surveys are being sent out across students and across campus. But Google Calendar really just didn't give it that good, like responsive look and feel that the events plugin currently does. So I think that's one of the biggest needs for any events functionality, is something that can be adapted to the CSS of the site. So I guess that's my thoughts on this.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Sheena, can you just say where you're from? What group you work out of?
Yeah, I work within the Student Affairs division on campus.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's one of the things, that is actually one of the things that we have gone back and forth on in relation to when we were looking at the audit, was for the sites that did use events calendar to a greater extent, the amount of information and the type of information that was being presented within those events, text heavy, images, links off to form, or additional links off to multiple things. That's one of the things that we did notice, that you can certainly link to things within Google Calendar, but it's basically text only. There's not a real depth of style that can be provided with Google Calendar, and similarly within today.wisc.edu. So I wanted to touch on those two things real quick. Again, Jean-Yves asked it in the chat a little bit earlier about the advantage of EC or Events Calendar versus Google Calendar. The real advantage is the integration, that is the functionality of it is integrated into WordPress specifically. Google Calendar isn't really built to integrate with WordPress per se. You can embed. We have certainly done that. And you can embed either a month view or a list view, but it is stylistically lacking. So that's one of the I don't want to say challenges or drawbacks. It's just one of the differences that Google has versus Events Calendar. And similarly with Today.Whisk, we have a page element that allows you to take a today.wisc.edu feed and embed it into your page. The problem is, again, the limitation of the type of content that you are putting into a today.wisc.edu event. So that's kind of where we stand with those two options. And as Jenna said, we are taking a very strong look at those because of the fact that we have to. We need to take a look at what is available and more supported than what we have seen from Events Calendar. Yeah. And there's probably a lot to Today.Whisk that I don't know. And I will freely admit that there is some depth there to the creation of the events, the creation and cultivating of a feed to put on your site. I know Nick, way back in the day when we were meeting on campus, did a presentation for the WordPress users group once for today.wisc.edu and creating feeds of a certain nature. So there are some options there. But as Jenna said, we're going to hit a spot where we're just not going to be able to meet the needs of all. And that's unfortunate, but to us, it might be the benefit for us to be able to better support the things. So
I'm just going to call out a really great idea that Nick Hanen had in the chat, which is having some sort of grid of feature, like a feature comparison. And we essentially have that on our side, but we don't have that available to all of you yet. So we'll work on getting some sort of documentation together for that so you can kind of see.
I can share too. We use, I'm with the La Follette School, and we use the events calendar pretty heavily. We're probably either in that medium or high level use. And it was one of the reasons why we decided to move to WiscWeb too, so that we could have more robust events management. The ability to really kind of customize longer descriptions, have hyperlinks in the text, as well as we have a pretty good amount of categorization too that flows to different parts of our website. And then the images because we'll then use the events and share them on social media, and the ability for them to kind of have that rich content to flow through has all been really positive for us. So, I mean, not that we're sold on events calendar, but if there's something comparable, like we don't use all of the functionality of it, but something that could meet some of those needs would be really exciting. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's helpful. Do you have concerns about who sees the content by any chance? I think I thought Today did have some way that you could make it more private, but I'm just curious if
it's not so much private or public. It's more of listed versus unlisted. So the events can be the events can be created so that they are not listed on like the broad campus calendar, but private's not the way that I would term it, because there's no real barrier to accessing it other than just not knowing that it exists. And then I wanted to touch on, sorry, Paige, go ahead and follow up.
I was just going to say, like, for the private and public thing, I mean, we've just used the categorization to tailor the events to different audiences who access different parts of our website. And if we really want something private, we will just give an email like an internal email newsletter that we will send to, because we don't want that out there, so.
Yeah, that's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on Alan's comment as well, because that actually does play into like the broader scope of our conversation, which is we're here talking to you as WiscWeb users and the WiscWeb service, and we're trying to figure out what we're going to do in relation to our service. But the idea of a broader campus event functionality has been kicked around for many a moon, and there is never a right answer because of the fact that, one, it really does require development, and it requires support, and it requires like what you were just saying, getting people to use it. It kind of requires that type of stuff. And UW-Madison is not one for centralized use of things. So getting that to happen presents another challenge for a campus-wide event management effort. So, I mean, you can look. I mean, again, you can look at WiscWeb as kind of like that boiling pot of, we have events calendar. It works ish, except it doesn't work anymore for us. We have access to today.wisc.edu. We have access to Google Calendar. We have three different calendar functions within our service alone that people can use. So that's kind of the whole. Yeah, well, to an extent, we're decentralized. Every flower is special.
If I could maybe share how we use the calendar in university housing. So we have a lot of our stuff is semi-private for our residents primarily. It's events that we wouldn't necessarily want the broader campus population to be coming to, because they're intended for, the students living in our buildings, paid for by our students living in our buildings. So that's been a little bit of a resistance point to us putting things into today.wisc. But I'm sure that's something we could get around if we wanted to. Our stuff is a mix of resident events, key dates for like contracts or move in, move out, billing due dates, things like that. There's dining events and promotions that we'll do as events on there too. So for the dining events, it is nice to be able to have an image, so that it's not just a very plain landing page to go to, because we're really promoting that as, there might be a Mardi Gras event, there might be a late night study breaks kind of thing, or even the resident events, it might be an open mic night or pottery or game night or things like that, where if you send somebody just to a plain text page, it's kind of boring and might not be as engaging to get people to attend as you would like it to be. So that's helpful. I think having the categories has been important to us so that we can display the calendar events on the appropriate pages within our site. We do have, multiple different audiences that come to that site, and we want them to be able to filter and see the events that are just for them, really. And I think we're probably one of the ones that either submitted or went in on the future request to have calendars events that could go across sites, because we have our main housing site, but then we also have like a current resident website to sort of filter down the information that's only relevant to the people that are currently living with us, because our public main site is the main focus of that is prospective students. So it would be nice to have some of those events on both of those sites that we own. And I think currently the only way we could do that is if we moved everything over to today.wisc, which we just have not done so far. But so we're probably in that kind of middle use category, I think, of websites with event calendar.
That's super helpful, Brendan. Thank you. I'm capturing notes as you go. So just know that I am taking notes on everything that you're kind of noting here on needs, which is super insightful. I appreciate you sharing all this information with us. So thank you.
Yeah, to Ben's point, that's one of the things that events calendar. That's one of the things that events calendar does lack, is that ability to pull from other sites, essentially. Whereas today or Google-ish, today would be the better option there. Webinar button, image, flyer. Yeah, I think that's kind of the greater use that we have seen, is kind of like it's a button. A button is nice visually, but that could be replaced with just a text link. The flyer part of it is the image part of it is one of the things where Google Calendar lacks greatly, and today lacks is that ability to add more style and just add more personality to the events themselves, which, I mean, to the extent that I mean, as I view it, they are meant to be simplistic, and that is as simplistic as you can get. When, what, who, a little bit of information. That's basic. That's the basics of what an event should be. The events calendar and some of the other plugins that we've looked at, you know, they provide more of that stylization and that customization. But again, the cost of running those becomes a bit I mean, it becomes a bit frustrating and a bit much for us to actually like dig into as well.
Something that's kind of interesting too is I mentioned it briefly in the presentation, but there is a tool kind of being looked at for those groups that need a little bit more in the marketing realm. It wouldn't be ideal for groups that just have everyday events or don't need any kind of registration, but Sue mentioned registration on one of the sites there, and that would be sort of the intended audience for that. I just don't know. There's not a good timeline on that. So that could be a year out. It could be 3 years out. And the tool that they're looking at right now might not get adopted, but I do know that there is sort of a need there that they've identified, and they are exploring options. And I think what we could do as a team too is then try to figure out how we can integrate that future tool with WiscWeb as much as possible.
Go ahead, Linda, if you're gonna chat.
Yes.
Hi.
There. I'm with the Weissman Center, and we have within our site, we have actually multiple websites. So like the housing situation, right now we have people who are posting the same events on like 3 different sites because we don't know where our visitors are going to go to look for. So sometimes they go to like the COW site, Community Outreach Wisconsin, or the USAID site, but or that's where who's doing the training, but they come to the Weissman site looking for it because they don't know the difference between all these different sites. So that's an issue. The other issue we have with the today at UW, the problem with that is that it doesn't allow the complexity of information that we like to share. And the visuals are really important because we also serve people with developmental disabilities. And so for straight text for them, it's not accessible. It's not accessible. They need to have something that allows us to have visuals for them to comprehend what they're looking at, depending on their learning profile. So that's an issue for us. We have probably about at least 2 and sometimes 3 or 4 events a week. We have events where we actually include more information about what the program is, speakers. We use tables right now in the events plugin, and that's something that wouldn't be available today at the UW. Am I saying that right? And because we've looked into that. And so then we'd have to like create a whole nother page for our event, which is something we'd like to stay away from. So other than having to duplicate the events on the different sites, having the events calendar has worked well for us. The only thing missing, I guess, is registration. And I know that there's a group here that's going to be doing a lot more training in the near future. And they were really hoping to have something where they could do registration and even have the ability for people to pay for their training through the app. And so who were you just talking about, Jenna, that was saying that they were looking at something like that?
It's the marketing automation team. So you might have spoken to Kyla Farrell, but they're looking for a tool that can integrate with Salesforce, essentially. So Blackthorn was the particular tool that I've heard of, but there's no decisions at this point. that I'm aware of. It was just a tool that they're looking at, but I think the overall goal was having something that integrated with Salesforce and that was intended for like registration payment for just like what you're saying, Linda. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Linda.
Yeah, and Wiseman's site was one of the ones that we looked at in relation to, like, I mean, not to put Linda on the spot, but there are a lot of complicated, I shouldn't say complicated, there are a lot of in-depth events that are created at the Wiseman Center's site. And one of the thoughts I had originally, which you kind of hit on, Linda, was, okay, if you really needed to do this, you could create pages and just advertise those pages within like a Google Calendar or a today.wisc event. Except now you're having to create and maintain X number of pages, which will get into the hundreds and eventually more. You could delete them all, sure. Yeah, so that's one of the things as well. I don't know if I'd have to look. I haven't looked at, I mean, because we haven't been able to get events calendar running very well in dev or QA, I haven't been able to look at like what the newer options are in relation to like historical events and things like that. I know one of the plugins I looked at, it did have an ability. Oh wait, yes. There is an option in events calendar where you could delete events after X number of days or years or months or whatever it might be. That's currently there. So that would help clean up like people who have hundreds of events, and you know, an event from 5 years ago maybe isn't as relevant these days. But yeah, that's a lot of thought of how much overhead will be added to you all as the admins of these sites when you have to do some of these event things differently outside of your WordPress site, which again is one of the benefits of events calendar. It lives within your site. So
yeah, and something I'm also curious on, and if anyone is able or willing to speak up on it. So we kind of touched on the fact that, at this point we can't upgrade without breaking things, but keeping things in a non-updated state is a security risk. So we're trying to figure out, what could we do as an alternative because it's not looking good with events calendar. But then we also need to know like how much time people would need to make a transition, and weigh that against the security implications. So if anyone is comfortable speaking out about what that would mean for them to have to move to another tool for their events, I would love to hear more about that.
you're done.
Okay, thank you, Paige.
Yeah.
So Paige says transitioning over the summer would be easier, and that's something that we did consider because the embed code change was something that we didn't have as much control over because it was more of a security related change that we needed to put in place in order to get additional security related changes in place. So we recognized that the timeline for that, which was primarily over the fall semester, was not an ideal time for many people. So yeah, having time over the summer, that's really good to know. Thank you.
I would agree this summer, this is Tiffany from Population Health Sciences. I would agree the summer would be so much better. And if we could have as much lead time as possible, and if we knew what would break before something we did have to put up on the calendar, that would be awesome. I know it's not you guys, and it would be hard to, predict, but as early as possible would be amazing.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the things we've been looking at too, is like when we first started doing our audit, one of the things we started to look at in relation to that audit was how far out have people started creating events, because that plays into this question, which is how much lead time before people would have to start creating events in an alternative source. And we had a couple sites, probably the two big ones that have spoken maybe the 3. I can't remember if La Follette has stuff out till the fall already, but I know Wiseman and Housing, I believe, have events that go beyond the summer at the moment that I've looked at. So
Ours is based on the semester, so we don't
Yeah.
have the year-round problem, but I'm sure most people do.
Yeah. So yeah, that'd be one of those things. And again, that'd be one of those things where we want to be able to, I don't know how to say this right, but we want to be able to make a decision that's going to be best for us as WiscWeb, but we want to make sure that that decision that's best for us is also best for you, because of the fact that, again, we're just not sure what overhead this is going to create for all of you in relation to extra work and things like that. But then also the fact that how much like guidance would you need or want in relation to, like, okay, how do I create these events in a different way, still get this information across, etc. So we want to make sure we give enough lead time so that we can all meet with you. Thanks, Paige. Yeah, like I said, I think housing and Wiseman were the 2 that I looked at. Those are the 2 that I looked at primarily when I started thinking about this conversation, because I know those are the 2 that do use heavy amounts of events throughout the various months. So, and that's not to say that other sites don't. It's just that my interaction with those sites is greater, and I know a little bit more about what they do with their sites versus what some of the other groups do for, like, webinars and seminars and things of that nature. I don't know what else to add to the conversation. Please fill out that survey. I'm gonna send the survey out with an email, along with a copy to this recording, so you can, if anybody wanted to read. I think we'll add the slide deck as well. I'll have the slide deck as well.
I think I'm going to create like an article on the site that has info, Nick's suggestion of having like the table of different options available, any other information that we can provide. We do have all of the details of like the usage of it, for example, that we can put there. We might also put a note in the new dashboard announcements feature, just so that anyone who's not here will be, and maybe doesn't get the email or something, can be aware of the information and of the survey.
Let's see, Mark. If the security risk is the biggest thing, can't the upgrade? I mean, the security risk is more about the fact that the plugin is out of date. It's several versions out of date. So that's where the security risk comes into play, is just we haven't been able to update it, and we can't update it because the moment we do move it into an environment, the update starts crashing things within our servers, within our hosting service, and within our WordPress instance, and a bunch of PHP errors start popping up. And the new fun one was we upgraded to Events Calendar 609. We upgraded to Events Calendar Pro 608. And when we upgraded those 2 together within our dev environment, whenever you tried to activate Events Calendar on a site, it gave an error message, and there's no error message other than an error occurred. That's it. Yeah, it just won't activate.
So basically, like if we were to upgrade, we would literally potentially break sites. Like it could bring down the service. It wouldn't work. Your not only your events wouldn't work, but your site wouldn't work. And so we honestly can't do that. And then the security risk is, as I mentioned earlier, if you don't patch those plugins regularly, you're not getting any new security updates that the vendor might be pushing out. So they might have found some flaw with their tech that they pushed out with the recent update, but we can't update. So then we still have that flaw in our service. So the longer you don't update, the higher risk you are. Let's say Sheena says, what are the top alternatives right now? So we kind of talked about a couple. So Today.Wisc, partially because it lets you do a little bit more. It's already integrated with UW theme. And it also offers that way to share events between sites, which was an identified need. Google Calendar, we've also explored to pretty deeply, I would say, finding out like what that could do. And I would say it's much more limited, obviously, than Events Calendar and even today in terms of what it can display. But if you're just looking for, I've got this, simple events and I need to have a list on my site or a calendar on my site, it's great for that. We also looked at several plugins. I think like I did a little search at one point of like, what are the top events management plugins? And Events Calendar is the top one by far, which is funny because we're having some real issues with the support there. The next would be Events Manager, which we tested. There's just some concerns about how it creates pages when you activate it. There would be significant training we'd have to do up front. And then there's also so many settings that we can't limit from a network level that we don't necessarily want folks to be able to change because it could cause implications. So
Yeah.
that would be like our number two. And I think Matt also explored a couple other plugin options that just weren't as high on like the list of like recommended plugins.
Yeah, to that extent, Events Manager was the plugin that I have tested the most and that I actually have liked the most. And I feel like it's a little less complicated than Events Calendar. And honestly, yes, I could find another plugin that works, that is supported, and that actually activates in production on our site. The problem is now we're looking to another plugin with no certainty as to how it would work into the future. What might change with the UW theme? What might change with our hosting with AWS? What might change with WordPress in general? I'm sorry, I said that. What might change with like the plugin? And so we run that risk if we choose a plugin to do this. And also, I mean, it doesn't offer some of the things that Today or Google does, which is simple and cross-site integration there. Let's see, I'm just going back here. Google Calendar and Today are the two top alternatives. Events Manager is the one plugin that we've looked at the most. Today.Whisk is all in-house developed. It was built by UW Marketing by Nick Weaver. And one of the reasons why it can't get some love is because of the fact that Nick Weaver is one man who is exceptionally busy with all of the various things that UW Marketing is busy with, which means that Today.Whisk is good enough and it's hard for him to throw any time at it. We've had conversations with him in the past. He would love to make Today.Whisk more. He just doesn't have the time. He doesn't have the bandwidth to do that type of thing. Technically, I think Events Calendar also has the ability to read from an RSS feed because you can directly access the calendar. The category of events, which in turn, I believe you can create an RSS feed off of the category.
Are you talking about Events Calendar?
Yeah.
Or Events Manager? Events Calendar. I did try that and I did not have consistent experience with RSS.
Okay.
Did not try with Events Manager though.
Yeah, and I haven't dove too deeply into Events Manager from that standpoint. Mainly because again, at a certain point it works great. But then we hit the things that Jenna talked about, which is when you activate Events Manager, there are so many options that we don't want people to be messing around with, and there are other complications that happen when it activates on a site that would have some effect on your sites when it activates. Not so much negative, but just there's some things about it that just cause a few issues that we'd have to make sure we got out ahead of if that's the way we went. So
just for time, I think we might need to switch over to the other topics if
Yeah,
that's cool. So what we can do is continue to fill out the survey. If you have any feedback that you weren't able to provide and want to, or just want to connect with us about this, feel free to reach out. And we'll continue to put out information that we have and share with you all and get feedback. But yeah, we have a couple other topics that we did want to talk about today, so I'll let Matt cover those.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you all for that conversation. Again, it's a big deal. We know it's a big deal. That's why we wanted to do it this way, so that we could have this interaction. We could hear from you, and we want to continue to hear from you. I promise you, this is not a decision that we are taking lightly. This isn't Google works, we're just going to move to Google. We don't want it to be that. We want you to know. It kills us to have to. It kills us. It really pains us to have to do, or to have this thought and have this conversation, but we have to, because it just isn't working. So we have to figure out what are we going to do moving forward. So please keep continuing to reach out to us and providing your feedback on that. So just 3 more things that I wanted to touch on. I'll touch on the last topic really briefly that I sent out, which was the limited ability to support Google Analytics, Google services in general. So for most of you know, if you do use it, hopefully you are aware of it. If you don't use it, within the UW theme, you have the ability to use Google Analytics, Google Tag Manager, Google Programmable Search, and Google Search Console. Those are the 4 Google services that you can integrate with your UW theme site. They are add-ons. They are not technically part of our campus Google contract. They are other services that Google provides. And so you've been able to use them, and we have been loosely trying to support your use of those, mainly through one person. That one person has left. So those of you who know Jonathan Dietering, he is no longer with Do It. He has taken a job. Bummer for us, great for him. He's taken a job with OHR to do some web development for them. So he has taken his expertise over there, which means our expert in all things Google is no longer here for us. So things relating to Google Analytics, Google Tag Manager, Google Search Console, very specifically, we can try our best to support, but it is not nearly the capacity that it was when we had Jonathan's knowledge available to us. So I just want to make sure I say that to everyone, because I know the please get yourself switched over to Google Analytics 4 if you haven't already. I'm beating that drum as hard as I can. Go do it. If you haven't done it already, come chat with me and let's get it going soon. But our ability to support things past the basics is limited now. So I just want to make sure you guys are all aware of that. Second topic was Gravity Forms. So Gravity Forms has an update sitting out there right now that you all are going to see get pushed through soon. I don't have a specific date on when I'm going to push it through, but I want to demo for you all what the new Gravity Form interface looks like right now. So this is basic Gravity Forms right here. For those of you who use it, you should be familiar with it. It looks the same. Editing existing events on the brain. Editing existing forms, all the same, nothing too big there. The biggest change, I shouldn't say the biggest change, the change for Gravity Forms now is the interface that you'll see when you add a new form to your site. So when you click Add New now, you get this little pop-up, and there are a number of pre-designed templates that are available to you within Gravity Forms. I say this because I want to make sure that people are aware that some of these templates don't work or will not work with WiscWeb. So things like e-commerce, PayPal checkouts, event registration to an extent. Some of these things will not work with us because WiscWeb does not have a commerce/charge functionality built into it. Whenever you need to do that stuff, we have you work with our web and mobile application service group. They build these things out. They put it under the charge.wisc.edu domain, and that's where it has to live. But I want to make sure before I push this out, you all are aware, and I'll make sure I update any documentation we have about this. But things like the simple, advanced, some of these things will work fine, but when you click on them, let's say donation, use template. Use template. It will tell you, etc. You need to install one of our payment add-ons. We don't install add-ons for Gravity Forms. We have, I think, two add-ons. I think we have two add-ons that exist within the WiscWeb service, only one of which I believe it might not even be a Gravity Forms. It might be the WP data tables. We have it so that the forms and the data tables do talk to each other. I don't know if we have any others. We're just not adding add-ons for this type of stuff. So you can delete that, and then you can build out your form however much you want. But again, we aren't accepting charge type stuff there. So I just want to make sure I said that really briefly. I'm going to push this out maybe later this week, maybe early. Nope, not, because later this week means tomorrow, and that's not happening. So next week, I'm going to push this out to production, but I wanted to take this opportunity to demo that for you guys really briefly. And then I will yield the floor to Scott quick.
Just a sec.
Oh, hi, Phil.
Phil has a comment. Sorry. Go ahead, Phil.
Hey folks, just want to piggyback on what Matt said, like just because there's a thing that looks like it'll take payment doesn't mean you can use it. And the short way to describe this is that if you do not know what the PCI DSS regulations are, you do not want to get University of Wisconsin-Madison fined by all of the credit card companies for accepting credit cards in a manner that is not approved. And that you'll be surprised how deep it goes, like how far back you think you might be from the credit card entry, and yet you're still in scope for PCI DSS. So do not do that under any circumstances. You need to be working with someone who has actually filled out the SAC-A or SAC-EP, which is the self-answering questionnaire. There are folks in cybersecurity that know a lot about PCI DSS, way more than I have any idea about. Please be careful with that. It is incredibly simple to get the university a multi-$100,000 fine for trying to accept credit cards when you have no business doing so and have not gone through the process to get those approvals. So just putting that out there, just because it looks like it's super simple, don't do it. I will mention most people who do this with their own businesses also have that exact same problem. They're like, oh, look, the form said it's fine. Like, that does not mean you're okay. That is not someone being able to take a look at that. So just keep that in mind. Ask if someone says, like, if your boss just tells you, hey, go do that, like, ask a ton of questions. You do not want to put your group on the hook for that. So thank you. And yes, charge.wisc, those are a great set of folks to go talk to, said the iPhone. Awesome. Thank you, iPhone, for joining.
Yeah. Yeah, and then just Katie, you can always reach out to me and I can try and at least gather some information and do a little bit of investigation. But like I said, it'll be Matt's limited best effort to do that type of stuff. Okay. Last thing that we wanted to touch on was over the past while now, we don't exactly know when it started happening, but we have been monitoring it for quite some time now. We've started to notice that across WiscWeb sites and across wisc.edu sites, one of the things that's been happening as you browse is the cookies that collect within your browser keep on collecting and keep on collecting. And to an extent where your browser contains so much data that you don't see because you're just browsing away, that it starts to cause errors when you try to either log into your WiscWeb site, visit your WiscWeb site, or visit, let's say, the knowledge base or another wisc.edu site where you'll get a 400 error or a 403 error specifically. And it tells you something along the lines of your header size is too large or something of that nature.
Or too many cookies or too many
cookies. Yeah, that's essentially what it is it's too many cookies. So what Scott did within this week, and I will definitely let him talk because he likes to talk to the audiences, is Scott added some code, some functionality behind the scenes that basically to a certain extent blocks a lot of things, but also informs you much better what is happening when you receive that error. So I will yield the floor to Scott. Go ahead.
Yeah, so thanks, Matt. I'm Scott Berg. I'm a developer on the WiscWeb team. And like Matt said, we kind of have been monitoring this and implementing some stuff for a while. We've had kind of reports of issues coming up since December, and they were very, very tricky to track down and nail down. But we think we kind of finally found multiple different kind of causes for these things. But yeah, like Matt said, the biggest issue that we were seeing is that various cookies were piling up in users' browsers and then getting tracked along to different sites. And the kind of long short of that is various different tracking softwares like Google Analytics. There's other popular ones on campus like Hotjar. There's some by Adobe. There's a ton of different softwares that different services and sites on campus use. When a tracking software like that wants to track someone, it sets a cookie on your browser. And when it does that, it gets to choose the domain that the cookie is being set at. And most of the time, that domain is the URL of the website. So something.wis.edu. In our case, what we had been seeing is that a lot of these cookies, and we have a hypothesis that some stuff changed with Google Analytics 4, and Google kind of silently updated some stuff in the background. But what was happening is the cookie can either be set at the domain of the site, or it can be set at the top level domain, which in 99% of the sites that we host would be wis.edu. So what we saw was that Google Analytics and various tracking softwares were setting cookies on the .wis.edu domain name, meaning that any site that contained .wis.edu would be able to have access to that cookie, and it would get carried along in their browser. So if someone visited, hundreds of different sites that had different tracking cookies, those cookies would all be saved, and then eventually your browser would have massive requests getting sent to servers. And the unfortunate part of this is not like just a WiscWeb issue. This is kind of just a web issue. So any web service on campus, the KB, my.wis.edu, WiscWeb, shared hosting sites, all kind of have a limit as to how much of a request can get sent to a server before it starts rejecting it. So we have implemented some changes in the UW theme on WiscWeb that have not yet been released to limit the kind of integration that we have with Google Analytics and better set a proper domain so that those cookies do not follow users around to every site that they visit. Those changes are not released publicly in the UW theme yet. They're currently in process and will be released soon, but we wanted to make the change on WiscWeb sooner rather than later because this is an issue that can potentially affect every service on campus, and we wanted to start, alleviating that pressure. We have also implemented some tools for tracking how often this is happening, as well as giving users more information if an error does occur in this manner. So if people do make requests to our service and they have too many cookies piled up, we will serve them an error message that says, hey, you have too many cookies, go clear your cookies and try again. The unfortunate part with this is that there is a very handy KB doc that has information on how to clear cookies in every browser, but if you're getting blocked out of WiscWeb because of this, you're also going to get blocked out of KB. So we have links to the vendor documentation directly. We also have information on how to contact the Do It Help Desk in there so that you can get some help. But yeah, just a general kind of PSA. There's no action needed by people. We're kind of changing things behind the scenes. But if you do receive reports from either colleagues or students or anyone visiting your site saying that there's kind of some weird errors, have them clear their cookies. If they need information on how to do that, there's a KB article right there that I just linked in chat. Although, like I said, if they're seeing that error, they might have to open that in an incognito or private browsing window or something like that. But this is also just a general PSA. Probably a good idea for folks to clear their cookies periodically, just because things can happen like that. And that's kind of often why, when there's tech issues, a lot of times the first instinct to say clear your cookies is because it can cause issues. And the unfortunate part of this too is that a lot of those tracking cookies will live on a user's browser for up to 2 years, if not more, which means that this problem, if you're like a power user that's visiting a ton of sites, it can happen very quickly, but it can also happen extremely slowly. So yeah, clear your cookies. That's the takeaway.
Yeah, and that's we're hitting 1 o'clock, so I know we have to get going here. But yeah, we just wanted to make sure people were aware of that because I'll get an email, we'll get a support case from time to time of, oh, Matt, I'm not able to access my site. I'm getting this error here, blah, blah, blah. And it's always, it's cookies. You just have to either clear your browser cache, clear your browser cookies, or open it in an incognito window. And that's usually the one thing where if you ever get to a spot where you can't access a site for some reason, try doing it in an incognito or a private browsing window and see if you get the same issues, because that will be the indicator there. So, okay, we're at 1 o'clock. I will stop the recording. Stop recording.